When Ruth stood on those courthouse steps holding $8 worth of honest work, she had no idea that 3 little words would shatter her world forever. Just a slave. That's what the plantation heiress spat at her. But what happened next shocked an entire town into stunned silence. A wealthy heir's public promise would either destroy them both or change the course of justice itself, while an 8-year-old girl with perfect pitch held the key to a secret that powerful men had buried for years. But when the overseer's ledger revealed the truth about stolen money and forged papers, someone was about to pay a price they never saw coming. What Ruth discovered, hidden in her mother's Bible, would expose a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of society. The storm that night would wash away more than just the roads. It would reveal who was truly free and who was living a lie. If you're watching this incredible story of courage and justice, subscribe and tell me what city you're watching from. Steam lifted from the biscuit tin in the plantation kitchen. Dawn light crept through shutters, still damp from the night's rain. Tansy sat cross-legged on a pine stool, humming a hymn exactly on pitch, while Ruth's needle flashed through satin. "Hold still now, Miss Lila." Ruth's voice stayed steady as she fitted the bodice seam. The fabric caught the lamplight cream satin with pearl buttons that cost more than most folks saw in a year. Lila Beaufort shifted her weight, impatient. How much longer? Near done. Ruth's fingers worked quick and sure, each stitch pulled true. Tansy's hum kept the rhythm steady, a low thread of sound that seemed to calm Ruth's hands. The kitchen smelled of sage tea and wet earth. Cook hummed along with Tansy while she rolled dough. The other housewomen moved quiet around the edges, tending fires and washing bowls. Tansy watched Ruth's needle catch the light. Something about the quilted sleeve Ruth used for pins made her think. Faint brown ink bled through one corner, tiny marks like writing. "What's that stain, Miss Ruth?" Ruth glanced down at the quilted fabric. Old ink, nothing to mind. But Tansy leaned closer. The marks looked deliberate, like letters. Her memory sparked something about Ruth's mother and a Bible margin. "Turn around," Lila's voice cut sharp. Ruth helped her pivot to check the mirror. The bodice fit perfect. Ruth's hands knew fabric like other folks knew weather. She'd been sewing fine gowns since she was 12. Her mother had taught her to read seams like scripture. Lila frowned at her reflection. "The sleeves still pull." "They don't pull, miss. They fit as ordered. Don't tell me what I see." Lila's cheeks flushed pink. "And I won't be paying full tally for work that needs redoing." Ruth's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed level. "Work's done proper. Tally stands." Tansy felt the air change. She hummed a little louder, trying to keep the peace. The hymn verse drifted through her mind, something about safe passage and hidden doors. Lila yanked at the bodice ties. "Help me out of this." Ruth's hands stayed gentle as she worked the hooks. "Bill comes to $8, miss, for the bodice and the 2-day dresses." $8? Lila laughed, but it sounded mean. "For slave work?" The kitchen went quiet. Even Cook stopped rolling dough. Ruth folded the bodice with care. "Good work earns fair wage. Since when do slaves set terms?" Lila's voice rose. "Papa's been too soft. That's what's wrong with this place. No proper standards." Tansy's humming trailed off. She stared at the quilted pincushion in Ruth's lap. Those brown ink marks weren't random. They looked like her mama's handwriting, the tiny script Ruth's mother used to trace in Bible margins. Ruth stood slow and straight. "We'll take the tally to town then. Let the clerk decide what's fair." Lila's eyes went hard. "You'll do nothing of the kind. Free contract work goes to town for settling." Ruth's voice stayed steady, but something steel-strong ran underneath. "Always has. Not anymore." Lila gathered her skirts. "Things are changing around here. Best you remember your place." She swept toward the door, then paused. "And keep that child from humming. Sounds like conjuring." After she left, the kitchen stayed quiet. Ruth sank back onto her stool and picked up the quilted sleeve. Her fingers traced the brown ink stains. Tansy scooted closer. "I remember the little writing." Ruth looked up sharp. "What writing?" "On the quilt piece. Your mama showed me once when I was small. Said it was important writing. From the good book." Ruth's hands stilled. "You remember that?" Tansy nodded. Her memory held tight to details most folks forgot. Perfect pitch for music, perfect recall for words and images. Steam lifted off the biscuit tin as Ruth said, "We'll take the tally to town, child. Today." By noon, the courthouse steps buzzed with Saturday business. Men in good coats clustered around the portico columns, talking crops and weather. Women gathered near the side entrance, fans fluttering despite the cool air. Ruth climbed the steps with Tansy beside her. The carved stone felt solid under their feet. Ruth carried the bill of work in a leather folder, each item listed clean in her precise hand. The clerk's office smelled of ink and sealing wax. Shelves lined the walls, packed with ledgers and rolled documents. Behind the main desk hung a display of official seals, different colors of wax, different shapes of stamps. "Morning, Mr. Hopkins." Ruth approached the clerk's high desk. "Come to settle a work tally." The clerk looked up from his ledger. Grey hair, careful hands, spectacles perched on his nose. "Morning, Ruth. What sort of work?" "Dressmaking. 3 pieces for Miss Beaufort." Ruth opened the folder and spread the itemized bill on the counter. $8 total. Mr. Hopkins studied the paper. "Fine, hand you." "Right, Ruth. Clear as print." "Thank you, sir." Tansy wandered toward the wall of seals, while Ruth and the clerk talked. So many different stamps and wax colors. The county seal caught her eye, a deep red wax with clear serifs on the letter R. She memorized the shape. The office door opened with a bang. Lila Beaufort swept in with 2 other ladies and a man in a dark coat. "Mr. Hopkins," Lila's voice carried authority. "I need to speak with you about a matter of improper conduct." The clerk looked up. "Miss Beaufort, what can I do for you?" Lila's eyes fixed on Ruth. "This woman is trying to collect payment for unsatisfactory work. I told her the matter was settled." Ruth straightened. "Work was done to order, miss. Bill stands as written." "The work was shoddy." Lila turned to the clerk. "And she's being insolent about payment." Mr. Hopkins looked between them. "What seems to be the problem with the work?" "Sleeves don't fit proper," Lila said. "Whole dress needs redoing." Ruth shook her head. "Dress fits exact to measurements. I can produce the pattern." The man in the dark coat stepped forward. Nathaniel Reed, heir to the plantation upriver. Tansy had seen him before at church gatherings. He had kind eyes and never talked down to the colored children. "Perhaps I can help settle this," Nathaniel said. "I've seen Ruth's work. Always first rate." Lila's cheeks flushed. "This isn't your concern, Nathaniel. Fair dealing concerns everyone." Nathaniel's voice stayed gentle but firm. "What's the exact nature of the complaint?" Lila's composure cracked. "The complaint is that she's demanding payment, like she has some right to set terms." "Like she's not." She stopped herself, glanced around at the watching faces. Ruth stood straighter. "Like I'm not what, Miss Lila? Like you're not just a slave?" The words rang in the sudden quiet. The clerk's pen stopped moving. The watching crowd drew breath. Nathaniel Reed stepped closer to the counter. His voice carried clear to every corner of the room. "Then let it be known when she is free. I shall call her my future wife." The clerk's pen clattered to the desk. Women gasped. Men stared. Ruth's eyes went wide. "Mr. Nathaniel, write it down, Mr. Hopkins." Nathaniel's voice stayed steady. "Let it be witnessed and recorded. When Ruth achieves her freedom, I offer my hand in marriage." The clerk picked up his pen with shaking fingers. "Sir, are you certain? Write it." Ink scratched across the registry page. The crowd pressed closer to watch. Tansy felt the air crackling like before a storm. Lila's face had gone white. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious." Nathaniel looked at Ruth. "If you'll have me." Ruth's hand went to her throat. "Yes, sir." "Yes." The clerk's quill scratched the final line. Nathaniel Reed's public vow lay witnessed on the page, signed and dated. Thunder rumbled upriver. Storm clouds gathered over the far hills. Behind the courthouse portico, Pike cornered Nathaniel in the shadow of a stone column. The overseer's face was hard as winter iron. "You've made a mistake, Reed." Nathaniel didn't step back. "I've made a promise. Promise to a slave." Pike spat into the dust. "You think that matters?" "It matters to me." Pike moved closer. His breath smelled of whiskey and tobacco. "Let me explain something. That woman belongs to the Beaufort estate. Any talk of freedom is just talk. The law says otherwise. Law says what I say it says." Pike's hand rested on the ledger under his arm. "See, I keep careful records. Debts, expenses, collateral. Ruth's got considerable debt against her name." "What kind of debt?" "Medical expenses, food, Housing. Interest compounds yearly. Pike opened the ledger and showed a page covered in figures. By my count, she owes near $300. Nathaniel studied the numbers. That's impossible. Numbers don't lie. Pike closed the book. Course, debts can be transferred, sold off to cover estate expenses. Lot of plantations down Louisiana way, always needing seamstresses. The threat hung clear in the air. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. You can't sell her. Can and will, unless this foolish talk stops. Pike touched his hat brim. Remove her tonight, quietly. Save everyone embarrassment. Inside the courthouse, Lila pressed close to Mr. Hopkins' desk. I need you to delay any unusual requests for a few days. The clerk looked uncomfortable. What sort of requests? Anything involving manumission papers? Freedom documents? That sort of nonsense. She leaned closer. There's considerable debt involved. Legal complications. Miss Beaufort, I can't delay legal filings without proper cause. Then find proper cause. Her voice carried an edge. The Beaufort family has contributed considerably to this county's prosperity. We'd hate to see that support redirected. Meanwhile, Tansy studied the wall of seals with careful eyes. Each wax color meant something different. The county seal used deep red wax. She could see the color clearly in the afternoon light. The letter R had sharp, clean serifs. She memorized every detail. Something told her those details mattered. As the courthouse bell tolled 1 o'clock, Tansy whispered to Ruth, "The Bible, Miss Ruth." The writing was in the Bible. Ruth's eyes sharpened. "What Bible, child?" "The one your mama kept, with the little brown writing in the margins." Tansy's perfect memory brought back the image clear. She said it was important. Said it had your name. Ruth gripped Tansy's hand. "Where is that Bible now?" "Aunt Temperance got it, when your mama died. Said she'd keep it safe." Ruth looked toward the courthouse door, then back at Tansy. "We need to find that Bible." Aunt Temperance's cabin sat in the hollow behind the quarters, surrounded by herb gardens and drying racks. Sage bundles hung from the porch eaves. The air smelled of mint and healing roots. "The paw." Midwife opened her door before they knocked. "Come in, child. Been expecting you." Ruth and Tansy stepped into the dim cabin. Shelves lined every wall, packed with jars and bottles. Dried plants hung from the rafters. A fire crackled in the small hearth. "Aunt Temperance," Ruth said, "I need to ask about Mama's Bible. Figured you might." The old woman moved toward a wooden chest in the corner. "Storm's been building all day. Time for hidden things to come to light." She lifted the chest lid and pulled out a small, worn Bible. The leather cover was cracked but intact. "Your mama made me promise to keep this safe. Said someday you'd need what's inside." Ruth took the Bible with careful hands. "What's inside?" "Look at the margins, child." The little brown writing. Ruth opened the book and held it close to the lamp. Tansy peered over her shoulder. Their tiny script in brown ink crowded into the narrow margin beside a psalm. "Can you read it?" Aunt Temperance asked. Ruth squinted at the faded letters. "It's hard to make out." Tansy touched the page gently. "It says your name, Ruth, and something about freedom papers." "Let me see." Aunt Temperance brought the lamp closer. "Your mama could read some, enough to know important words." Ruth traced the letters with her finger. "Upon death of master, Ruth named for manumission." She looked up sharp. "Aunt Temperance, this is a legal clause. Written in the old master's hand," the midwife confirmed. "Initialed by the parlor clerk of a decade ago. Your mama saw him write it." Old Isaiah spoke up from the corner where he'd been sitting quiet. "I remember that day. Old Master Beaufort was ailing. Called for his Bible and wrote something in the margin. Said it was between him and the Lord." Ruth's hands shook as she held the Bible. "This says I should have been freed when he died." "Should have been," Aunt Temperance nodded. "But papers got lost in the probate. Or maybe misplaced on purpose. What do we do with this?" Aunt Temperance blew the lamp higher. "Paper ain't freedom till a seal kisses it." Thunder rumbled overhead. Rain began to tap the cabin roof. "Pike's planning to move you tonight," Isaiah said. "Heard him talking to the rivermen." Ruth clutched the Bible tighter. "We need to get this to Mr. Hopkins." "Come morning," Aunt Temperance said. "Storm's getting worse. Travel's dangerous in the dark. Morning might be too late." Ruth looked toward the door. Rain drummed harder on the roof. Tansy hummed a few bars of her favorite hymn. The melody calmed her mind and helped her think. "The preacher knows the hymns," she said suddenly. "What hymns, child?" "The ones with the roots. The verses that tell which roads are safe." Tansy looked up at Ruth. "If we have to travel in the storm, I know the way." Rain lashed the cabin windows as Ruth and Tansy prepared to leave. Aunt Temperance wrapped the Bible in oiled cloth, then stitched it inside a small quilt square. "Keep it dry and close," she said. "That writing's old. Water would wash it clean away." Ruth tucked the quilted package inside her shawl. "How will we get past the patrol roads?" "The hymns," Tansy said. "Preacher taught them to me. Each verse has directions." Old Isaiah looked up from sharpening his knife. "You sure about this, child?" Storm's getting fierce. Thunder crashed overhead. Lightning lit the cabin windows white. Tansy began to hum, soft and low. The melody wound through the room like a thread. First verse tells the safe creek crossing. Second verse maps the back road to town. Third verse gives the signal for safe houses. "How do you know all that?" Ruth asked. "Perfect pitch, perfect memory." Tansy's hum never wavered. "Songs stick in my head exactly as taught." Aunt Temperance handed Ruth a lantern with a dark hood. "Show no light till you're past the patrol station. What about Pike's men?" "They'll be watching the main road," Isaiah said. "Hymn Road runs along the old boundary line. Harder walking, but hidden." Ruth pulled her shawl tight. "We best go now, before the creek rises too high." The midwife pressed a small bag into Tansy's hands. "Sage leaves. For calming horses and dogs if they catch your scent." They stepped out into the driving rain. Water immediately soaked through Ruth's shawl, but the quilted Bible package stayed dry against her chest. Tansy began the first verse in a whisper that somehow carried over the storm. Her voice guided them along the creek path, timing their steps to the melody's rhythm. The preacher's house sat dark among the pine trees. Rain dripped from the eaves like a beaded curtain. Ruth and Tansy approached the back door, following the hymn's directions. Tansy sang the second verse under her breath. At the final note, she knocked 3 times, paused, then knocked twice more. Footsteps creaked inside. The door opened a crack. "Who's there?" "Friends following the song," Tansy whispered. The preacher opened the door wider. "Come in, quickly." They stepped into a small kitchen lit by a single candle. The preacher was a thin man with gentle eyes and calloused hands from farm work. "Dangerous night for traveling," he said. Ruth unwrapped the quilted package. "We need help getting this to the courthouse." The preacher studied the Bible in the candlelight. "What's the urgency?" "Ruth's freedom papers," Tansy said, "hidden in the margins. Pike means to sell her downriver before morning." The preacher's face grew grave. "Let me see." Ruth opened the Bible to the marked page. The brown ink writing looked faded but legible in the candlelight. "This is the old master's hand," the preacher confirmed. "I saw him write legal documents many times. Same script, same brown ink he favored. Is it enough to take to court?" "If authenticated, yes." The preacher closed the Bible carefully. "But Pike has friends among the night patrol. Getting to town won't be simple." "The hymns will guide us," Tansy said. "Third verse gives the safe house signals." The preacher nodded slowly. "You know the song's true. Your grandmother taught them to you?" "Ruth's mama taught me," said music was memory, and memory was freedom. Lightning flashed outside. Thunder followed close behind. "Creek's rising fast," the preacher said. "Main bridge will be washed out by dawn. Is there another way?" "Ferry crossing, if old Silas is still working." The preacher reached for a coat. "I'll guide you part way. These roads are treacherous in the dark." They left through the back door, following a path that wound between the trees. The preacher carried a shuttered lantern that threw narrow beams through the rain. Dr. Morrison's house stood at the edge of town, lamplight glowing in the front windows. The doctor was Nathaniel Reed's oldest friend and the county's most respected physician. Inside, Nathaniel sat by the fire, trying to dry his clothes. He'd ridden through the storm to reach town before the roads became impassable. "You're certain about this course?" Dr. Morrison asked. He was a dignified man with silver hair and steady hands that had delivered half the babies in the county. "Certain as sunrise," Nathaniel replied. "The woman deserves her freedom, and I meant what I said about marriage. Public declarations are hard to retract. I don't intend to retract anything." Nathaniel leaned forward. "Doctor, You delivered Ruth's baby years ago, the one that didn't survive. You know she's good people. Dr. Morrison nodded. Best seamstress in 3 counties. Gentle hands, gentle heart. Pike's moving against her tonight. Claims she owes impossible debts. Pike's ledgers are creative works of fiction. The doctor poured 2 glasses of brandy. I've seen his debt calculations. Mathematical impossibilities. Can you help us fight this? If proper legal documents surface, yes. But documents alone aren't enough. Need witness testimony, character references. A knock sounded at the back door. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. Dr. Morrison frowned. That's the emergency signal. He opened the door to find Ruth, Tansy, and the preacher standing in the rain. Come in, come in. The doctor ushered them inside. What brings you out in this weather? Ruth pulled the quilted package from her shawl. Freedom papers. Hidden in Mama's Bible. Nathaniel stood up fast. Ruth, how did you... Tansy remembered the writing, Ruth said. Margin notes in the old master's hand. Dr. Morrison examined the Bible under a bright lamp. His medical training had taught him to read fine print and examine minute details. This appears authentic, he said after several minutes. Script matches documents I've seen from the old master. Brown ink is consistent with his preferences. Enough for court? The preacher asked. If the chain of custody can be established. Dr. Morrison looked at Tansy. Child, can you read any of these words? Tansy approached the lamp and studied the margin text. Ruth's name, here. Freedom there. Upon death. Of master. She looked up. Says she should have been freed when he died. The doctor's eyebrows rose. You read that entire passage? Yes, sir. How old are you? 8, sir. Dr. Morrison looked amazed. Child can read Latin medical terms too, I'd wager. Sharp mind. Thunder crashed outside. Rain hammered the windows. Pike's men will be searching soon, the preacher said. We need to reach the courthouse. In this storm? Doctor. Morrison shook his head. Rivers are rising. Bridge might be out. There's the ferry, Nathaniel said. If we can reach the landing. Ferry runs by hymn signals, Tansy said. 4th verse has the crossing codes. The courthouse basement provided shelter while they waited for dawn. Judge Cartwright had opened the building early, roused from bed by Dr. Morrison's urgent message. The basement smelled of old wood and lamp oil. Legal documents filled wooden crates and metal filing cabinets. A long table dominated the center of the room. Judge Cartwright examined Ruth's Bible by lamplight. He was a careful man who'd built his reputation on fair dealing and strict interpretation of law. The handwriting appears consistent, he said after long study. But we need corroborating evidence. Such as? Nathaniel asked. Witness testimony, supporting documents, proof of the deceased master's intent. Ruth sat beside Tansy on a wooden bench. Who would testify for a slave's freedom? More folks than you think, Doctor, Morrison said. I'll testify to your character. The preacher will confirm the document's provenance. What about legal precedent? Nathaniel asked. Judge Cartwright pulled a leather volume from the shelf. Manumission by deathbed clause is recognized in this county, if properly witnessed and recorded. The margin clause mentions a parlor clerk's initials, Tansy said. I can see them in the ink. The judge leaned closer. Where, child? Tansy pointed to tiny markings beside the main text. There, J, H, those letters. Joshua Hampton, the judge said immediately. He was parlor clerk for the Beaufort estate 10 years ago, still lives in town. Would he remember this document? If it's authentic, he should. Judge Cartwright checked his pocket watch. Court opens at 9. We'll need Hampton here to testify. Thunder rumbled overhead, but the rain seemed lighter now. I'll fetch him. Doctor, Morrison offered. Joshua's an early riser. What about Pike? Ruth asked. He won't give up easy. Pike's authority comes from the estate. Judge Cartwright said, if you're legally freed, his claims become worthless. Tansy hummed softly while they talked. The melody helped calm her nerves and sharpen her memory of the night's events. Child, the judge said, how did you learn to read so well? Ruth's mama taught me letters, said reading was the first step to freedom. Wise woman. The judge made notes on a legal pad. We'll need your testimony too, about finding the document and reading the clause. As grey dawn crept through the basement windows, Footsteps echoed on the courthouse stairs above. "Mr. Hopkins is here," Judge Cartwright said. "Time to begin." The courthouse filled with early morning bustle, despite the storm damage outside. Broken tree limbs littered the steps. Water pooled in the gutters from the night's heavy rain. Mr. Hopkins, the court clerk, arrived with his record books and sealing materials. Behind him came Joshua Hampton, the former parlor clerk, now a shopkeeper with careful eyes and a precise manner. "Mr. Hampton," Judge Cartwright said, "thank you for coming so early. Dr. Morrison said it was urgent." Hampton removed his wet coat. "Something about old estate documents." Ruth unwrapped the Bible and opened it to the margin clause. "Do you recognize this writing?" Hampton adjusted his spectacles and bent over the page. His face grew thoughtful as he studied the brown ink script. "This is Master Beaufort's hand," he said after several minutes. "I watched him write margin notes many times. Always used that particular brown ink, mixed it himself from oak gall and iron. Do you recall this specific entry?" Judge Cartwright asked. "I do." Hampton pointed to the tiny initials beside the text. "My marks, J.H. I initialed it when he asked me to witness the clause." "What were his exact words?" Hampton closed his eyes, remembering. He said, "Joshua, witness this upon my death. Ruth shall be freed. Her service has been faithful, and freedom is her earned reward." Ruth's hand went to her throat. He truly said that, word for word. Hampton looked at her kindly. "Your mother was there too, sitting beside his bed. He told her the clause would ensure your freedom." Judge Cartwright made careful notes. "This testimony confirms the document's authenticity." A commotion sounded outside, horses arriving at speed, voices shouting orders. "Mr. Hopkins peered through the window. "Pike's here, with county sheriff and 3 deputies. On whose authority?" the judge asked. "Arrest warrant," came the reply, as boots stomped up the courthouse steps. Pike burst through the main doors, water dripping from his coat. Behind him came Sheriff Watson and his men. "Judge Cartwright," Pike called out, "I have warrant to arrest a runaway slave named Ruth, theft of estate property." "What property?" Nathaniel demanded. Pike pulled out a document with an official-looking seal. "Bible belonging to the Beaufort estate, stolen from the Manor House library." Judge Cartwright examined the warrant. "This seal appears authentic." Tansy studied the wax color from across the room. Something looked wrong. "Judge, sir?" "Yes, child?" "The wax color. It's not the county red." Pike scowled. "What would a slave child know about official seals?" "She knows plenty, Doctor," Morrison said. "Tansy, what do you see?" The little girl approached the warrant carefully. "This wax is brown red, not deep red like county seals. And the letter R, the serif is broken on the bottom stroke." Mr. Hopkins looked at the warrant more closely. "She's right. County seals use deep red wax exclusively, and our R has perfect serifs." Pike's face darkened. "You take a slave child's word over legal documents." "I take accuracy over forgery," Judge Cartwright said coldly. "Sheriff, where did this warrant originate?" Sheriff Watson looked uncomfortable. "Pike brought it to me, said it came from state court." "No state seal," Tansy observed. "Just the broken county seal." Pike reached for his gun. "Enough of this." But Nathaniel was faster. He grabbed Pike's wrist and twisted hard. The weapon clattered to the floor. "Sheriff," Judge Cartwright said, "I believe you have the wrong warrant and the wrong suspect." As Pike struggled in Nathaniel's grip, more people arrived at the courthouse. Word had spread through town about the early morning proceedings. Lila Beaufort swept in with her attorney, a nervous man in an expensive coat who kept glancing around the room. "Judge Cartwright," she announced, "I demand this nonsense be stopped immediately." "What nonsense is that, Miss Beaufort?" "Claims about freedom papers, forged documents, absurd testimony from slaves." Judge Cartwright held up Ruth's Bible. "Are you familiar with this item?" Lila's attorney stepped forward. "My client objects to any evidence not properly presented through legal channels. This Bible belonged to the Beaufort estate," the judge continued. "Contains margin notations in your father's hand regarding manumission." "My father made no such provisions," Lila said firmly. Joshua Hampton spoke up. "Miss Lila, I was there when he wrote the clause. You were in Charleston, visiting cousins." "That's a lie," It's witnessed truth. Dr. Morrison said, I treated your father during his final illness. He spoke often about settling debts, including moral debts to faithful servants. Lila's composure cracked. He was delirious. Fever dreams. Nothing he said was legally binding. The written clause is binding, Judge Cartwright said, properly witnessed and initialed. By a slave. Lila's voice rose. Slave testimony doesn't count in any court. My testimony does, Hampton said quietly, as does Dr. Morrison's. And the preacher's. Pike finally spoke up from where Nathaniel held him. Debts, he said desperately. She owes considerable debts to the estate. Medical care, food, housing. Can't be freed with debts outstanding. He pulled out his soggy ledger and opened it to show columns of figures. Ruth owes $347 by my calculation. Judge Cartwright studied the ledger. These numbers seem excessive. Compound interest, Pike explained. Yearly charges for room and board. Medical expenses for that baby she lost. Ruth's face went pale. You charged me for grieving my dead child? Time lost from work, Pike said coldly. Economic loss to the estate. Doctor. Morrison stepped forward, anger flashing in his eyes. I delivered that baby. Charged nothing for my services. Who exactly received payment for medical expenses? Pike's mouth worked silently. More creative bookkeeping, Nathaniel said. How much of that money went into your own pocket? Sheriff Watson studied Pike's ledger over the judge's shoulder. These entries, some are in different ink. Tansy hummed softly while examining the pages. Added later, she said. The ink's not the same age. What do you see, child? Judge Cartwright asked. Fresh ink on old pages, some numbers written over erased marks. Tansy pointed to specific entries. See how the paper's whiter where words were scraped off? Pike jerked against Nathaniel's grip. You believe a slave child over written records? I believe evidence, the judge said, and this evidence suggests document forgery. Rain continued to fall outside, though lighter now. The courthouse basement had grown crowded with witnesses and observers. Word of the proceedings spread through town like creek water after a storm. Judge Cartwright called for order. We need to settle several legal questions. First, the authenticity of the manumission clause. He spread Ruth's Bible open on the table where everyone could see. Mr. Hampton has testified to witnessing this document. Dr. Morrison confirms the deceased master's stated intentions. The handwriting appears consistent with known samples. Lila's attorney objected. The chain of custody is unclear. This Bible could have been altered at any time. By whom? Dr. Morrison asked. Ruth can't write in the old master's distinctive hand. Neither can her mother, who died years ago. Someone else could have forged it. For what purpose? Nathaniel demanded. Ruth has lived as a slave for years since her master's death. Why would she wait until now to produce false documents? Tansy raised her small hand. Judge, sir? Yes, child? I can prove the writing is old. Everyone turned to look at her. Judge Cartwright nodded. How? Brown ink fades in patterns. Fresh ink stays dark at the edges. Old ink bleeds into the paper fibers. Tansy approached the Bible. This ink has the bleed pattern of years, not days. She pointed to tiny details visible under the lamp's bright light. See how the letters have fuzzy edges? That takes time to develop. Dr. Morrison looked impressed. The child has keen observation skills. Observation doesn't establish legal precedent, Lila's attorney countered. But expert testimony does, Judge Cartwright said. Mr. Hampton, in your professional opinion, is this document authentic? Without question, Hampton replied. I've handled thousands of documents in my career. This is genuine. Pike spoke up desperately. What about the debts? Even if she should have been freed, outstanding debts prevent manumission. Judge Cartwright examined Pike's ledger again. These debt calculations appear suspect. Sheriff, I want this ledger examined for evidence of fraud. Sheriff Watson studied the pages carefully. Multiple ink colors, different handwriting styles. Some entries appear added recently. I keep careful records. Pike protested. You keep false records, the sheriff said. This is evidence of document forgery and potential embezzlement. Tansy hummed another verse of her hymn while they talked. The melody helped her think clearly about everything she'd observed. Judge, she said suddenly, There's something else. What is it, child? Pike's arrest warrant, the fake one. I know who made that seal. The room went quiet. Go on, Judge Cartwright encouraged. The broken serif on the I've seen that before. In the printing shop behind the livery stable. Old Mr. Jameson has a stamp with the same broken serif. Sheriff Watson looked interested. Jameson does odd printing jobs for cash, no questions asked. Pike paid him to make a false county seal. Nathaniel asked. Looks likely, the sheriff said. I'll investigate that connection. As the morning wore on, more evidence mounted against Pike. The sheriff discovered discrepancies in estate records going back months. Money intended for slave provisions had been diverted to Pike's personal accounts. Judge Cartwright reviewed all the testimony and evidence. The court finds the manumission clause authentic and legally binding. Ruth was legally freed upon her master's death. Ruth's knees nearly buckled with relief. Nathaniel steadied her with a gentle hand. However, the judge continued, there remains the question of debts. Pike straightened hopefully. After examining the ledger evidence, this court finds the debt calculations fraudulent. Sheriff, please arrest Mr. Pike for document forgery, embezzlement, and attempted kidnapping. Sheriff Watson moved toward Pike with handcuffs. You're under arrest. Pike backed against the wall. You can't prove anything. Your own ledger proves fraud, the sheriff said. Different inks, altered entries, impossible compound interest calculations. I was protecting estate property. You were stealing from the estate, Dr. Morrison said, and from Ruth. As the sheriff led Pike away in chains, Judge Cartwright addressed Ruth directly. Miss Ruth, that's your proper title now. You are hereby declared a free woman. All fraudulent debts are dismissed. Ruth began to cry, tears of relief and joy mixed together. Lila Beaufort stood frozen, watching her world crumble. This isn't over, she said quietly. Yes, it is, Nathaniel replied. He turned to Ruth. I believe I owe a lady a proper proposal. Before God and the assembled crowd, Nathaniel knelt on one knee. Ruth, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Yes, Ruth whispered. Yes, I will. Tansy began to hum her hymn, and one by one, the crowd joined in. The melody filled the courthouse, basement, like a prayer of thanksgiving. But as the hymn rose to the rafters, storm clouds gathered again outside. This battle was won, but the larger war for justice was far from over. The afternoon sky hung heavy with new storm clouds as the crowd spilled out of the courthouse. Word of Ruth's freedom and Nathaniel's proposal spread through town like wildfire. Some folks smiled and offered congratulations. Others frowned and whispered among themselves. Change always brought trouble alongside hope. Ruth stood on the courthouse steps, holding her freedom papers with trembling hands. The official seal pressed into red wax made everything real and final. What happens now? She asked Nathaniel. We make plans, he said. Careful plans. Some folks won't accept this easy. Tansy tugged on Ruth's skirt. Miss Ruth, there's something else. What is it, child? Pike had help, seen him talking to other overseers at the river landing. They got plans too. Dr. Morrison joined them on the steps. Tansy's right. Pike belonged to a network of men who've been selling folks downriver without proper papers. This won't end with his arrest. Then, we need to move fast, Nathaniel said. Get properly married and established before they can mount another challenge. Judge Cartwright appeared at Ruth's elbow. Miss Ruth, I suggest you register your freedom with 3 different county offices. Makes the papers harder to dispute. How long will that take? Rest of today if we hurry. The judge checked his pocket watch, but travel's still dangerous. Storm knocked down trees on most roads. Tansy began humming again, working through the verses in her mind. Safe roads are marked in the song, she said. 3rd and 4th verses tell the back ways to the county offices. You sure about those routes? Dr. Morrison asked. Sure as sunrise. Tansy's voice carried complete confidence. Songs don't lie if you sing them true. Ruth made her decision. We go now. All of us together. They traveled in Dr. Morrison's wagon, following routes that only Tansy knew from her hymn verses. The back roads wound through pine forests and along creek beds, avoiding the main thoroughfares where trouble might wait. Tansy rode up front with the doctor, humming directions as they drove. Her perfect pitch and perfect memory guided them around fallen trees, and washed-out bridges. "Turn left at the lightning-split oak," she said, remembering the lyrics exactly. "How do you hold all these details in your head?" Dr. Morrison marveled. "Music is memory," Tansy replied. "Mama Ruth always said so." Behind them in the wagon bed, Ruth and Nathaniel sat side by side, not quite touching but close enough to share warmth. The freedom papers stayed wrapped in oiled cloth inside Ruth's shawl. "Are you frightened?" Nathaniel asked softly. "Terrified," Ruth admitted. "Free is something I never dared dream too long. We'll face whatever comes together." Ruth looked at him with wonder. "Why? Why risk everything for a woman like me?" "Because you're exactly the woman I hope to find. Kind, strong, faithful, brave." Nathaniel's voice carried complete conviction. "Your freedom just makes it possible to court you proper." The wagon rolled on through the afternoon, following Tansy's musical map toward the county offices. By evening they had visited 3 county offices and registered Ruth's freedom in 3 separate ledgers. Each clerk examined the documents, compared handwriting samples, and applied official seals. "Triple recorded now, Doctor," Morrison said as they prepared for the journey home. Hard to challenge that much documentation. They were preparing to leave the final county office when riders approached at speed. 6 men on horseback, led by Pike's brother Wade, a man with cold eyes and a reputation for violence. "That's far enough," Wade called out, blocking their path. "Doctor?" Morrison kept his hands steady on the reins. "What do you want, Wade?" "Justice," Wade replied. "My brother's been arrested on false charges. Time to set things right." "Your brother's in jail for fraud and embezzlement," Nathaniel said. "Nothing false about it. Story I heard tells different." Wade's hand rested on his gun. "Heard tell of forged papers and slave testimony being used to steal estate property. Ruth is free by law," Dr. Morrison stated firmly. "Slave law don't count when written by slaves." Wade spurred his horse closer. "Hand over the woman and we'll call it settled." Tansy began to hum, very softly. The melody seemed to calm the horses, but the men grew restless. "Nobody's handing anybody over," Nathaniel said. He climbed down from the wagon, positioning himself between Wade and Ruth. 6-1 ain't good odds, Reed." 6-3, corrected a new voice. They turned to see Sheriff Watson approaching with 2 deputies. The lawman had followed at a distance, suspecting trouble. "Problem here, Wade?" the sheriff asked. "No problem, Sheriff. Just discussing legal matters." "Legal matters get discussed in courtrooms, not on back roads with drawn guns." Sheriff Watson's voice carried authority. "I suggest you boys ride on home." Wade's eyes flicked between the sheriff and his prey. "This ain't finished." "Yes, it is," the sheriff said firmly. "Ride out, now." Reluctantly, Wade and his men wheeled their horses and galloped into the gathering dusk. "Thank you, Sheriff," Ruth said. "Just doing my job, miss." But Wade wasn't wrong about one thing: this isn't finished. You folks need to be careful. As darkness fell, they began the long journey home, following Tansy's hymn through the maze of back roads. The little girl's voice guided them through the night, steady as a compass needle pointing toward freedom. Dawn was breaking as they finally reached the outskirts of town. The courthouse bell began to ring, not the usual hourly chime, but an urgent tolling that meant official business. "What's happening?" Ruth asked. Dr. Morrison urged the horses faster. "Don't know, but we best find out." They arrived to find a crowd already gathered on the courthouse steps. Judge Cartwright stood on the portico with Mr. Hopkins and several other officials. "What's the commotion?" Nathaniel called out. "Change in plans," Judge Cartwright replied. "Wade Pike and his men rode through town before dawn, making threats. I've decided to conclude this matter with full legal ceremony." "What kind of ceremony?" "Public reading of all documents, final verification of seals and signatures. Complete legal closure." The judge looked at Ruth. "Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny?" Ruth straightened her shoulders. "I'm prepared for truth." The courthouse filled as word spread. Townspeople crowded into every available space. Some came to witness history, others came hoping to see the legal proceedings fail. Judge Cartwright called for order. "We gather to conclude the matter of Ruth's manumission and verify all legal documents." He spread the Bible margin clause on the table, where everyone could see. Under bright lamplight, the brown ink writing looked as clear as the day it was penned. "Mr. Hopkins," Please read the manumission clause aloud, the clerk's voice carried to every corner of the room. Upon the death of this master, the slave Ruth shall be freed in recognition of faithful service and Christian duty. Signed, witnessed, and sealed. Mr. Hampton, do you confirm this as authentic? I do. I witnessed the writing and initialed the document personally. Judge Cartwright heated red wax over a candle flame. Final verification requires the county seal. Tansy watched intently as he prepared the wax. Color's right, she said. Deep red like county seals should be. The judge pressed the seal into the wax with careful precision. It made a clean, sharp impression with perfect serifs on every letter. Ruth is hereby confirmed as free by record, witnessed by law, and sealed by this court. The crowd erupted in a mixture of cheers and angry mutters. History was being made, and everyone knew it. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Lila Beaufort made one final desperate attempt to overturn the proceedings. She cornered Judge Cartwright near his chambers. Your Honor, I petition for appeal based on procedural irregularities. What irregularities? The judge asked patiently. Slave testimony was given equal weight to white testimony. Established legal precedent. Miss Beaufort, the judge interrupted. This court recognizes truth regardless of its source. The testimony was corroborated by documentary evidence and expert witnesses. Expert witnesses? Lila's voice rose. A shopkeeper, a doctor, and a preacher? What expertise do they possess in legal matters? Mr. Hampton has 20 years' experience with legal documents. Dr. Morrison understands medical and scientific evidence. The preacher knows community standards and moral law. Judge Cartwright's patience was wearing thin. More importantly, their testimony was consistent and credible. Lila played her final card. What about estate property? The Bible belongs to my father's estate. It should be returned. The Bible contains Ruth's freedom papers. She has legal right to possess documents proving her status. Then I demand compensation for the lost property. Judge Cartwright studied Lila with cold eyes. Miss Beaufort, your overseer stole money from your estate for months. Your debt problems come from that theft, not from a freed woman keeping her papers. The truth hit Lila like a slap. Her financial troubles weren't Ruth's fault, they were Pike's, and now Pike sat in jail while she faced creditors alone. The estate is ruined, she whispered. The estate can be saved with honest management, the judge replied. But that's your challenge to face. Ruth approached slowly, still clutching her freedom papers. Miss Lila? Lila turned, tears threatening to fall. I'm sorry about the estate troubles. If you need seamstress work done, I'll take commissions. Fair wage for fair work. For a moment, Lila's composed mask slipped completely. Ruth was offering to help the woman who had called her just a slave only days before. Why? Lila asked. Because kindness costs nothing, Ruth replied, and everybody deserves a second chance. That evening, a small group gathered at the country chapel for an informal ceremony. The preacher had offered to perform a blessing, not a legal marriage yet, but a formal recognition of Nathaniel and Ruth's engagement. The chapel sat among pine trees, its simple wooden structure glowing with lamplight. A dozen friends filled the pews. Dr. Morrison, Judge Cartwright, Mr. Hopkins, the preacher's family, and several others who had supported Ruth's cause. Tansy sat in the front row, humming softly to herself. The hymn that had guided them through dark roads now seemed like a celebration song. Ruth wore her best dress, a blue cotton gown she had sewn herself. Nathaniel stood beside her in a clean white shirt and dark coat. They looked nervous, but determined. The preacher spoke simply about love, courage, and the long road to justice. Marriage is a covenant, he said, not just between two people, but between those people and their community. We witness your promise tonight. Nathaniel pulled a small object from his pocket, his mother's gold ring, simple but elegant. This belonged to my mother, he said to Ruth. She would have loved you. He slipped the ring onto a blue ribbon and tied it around Ruth's wrist. Until the law catches up with love, he said. Ruth's eyes filled with tears. I accept your promise. The congregation joined voices for a final hymn, not Tansy's traveling song, but a hymn of thanksgiving. The melody rose through the chapel rafters and out into the star-filled night. After the ceremony, the small group gathered on the chapel porch to share cake and cider. Lanterns cast warm circles of light in the darkness. Judge Cartwright pulled Nathaniel aside for a private word. "Son, you know this won't be easy. Some folks will never accept what happened today." "I understand the risks," Nathaniel replied. "Make sure Ruth understands them too. Freedom on paper isn't the same as freedom in practice." Nathaniel nodded. "We've talked about it. Plan to move north in a year or two, once things settle down." "Wise thinking. Doctor." Morrison joined their conversation. "What about Tansy? That child has remarkable abilities." "She stays with us," Ruth said firmly, approaching the group. "No child of mine gets left behind." "Mine too now," Nathaniel added, putting his arm around Ruth's shoulders. "We're a family." Tansy looked up from where she sat on the porch steps. "Does that mean I can learn to read more books?" "All the books you want," Ruth promised. The little girl grinned and began humming again, a new melody this time, one that sounded like hope given voice. As the evening wound down, the preacher offered a final blessing. "May your journey be safe, your love be strong, and your faith be constant." The three of them, Ruth, Nathaniel, and Tansy, climbed into Dr. Morrison's wagon for the ride to their new life. Behind them, the chapel glowed with warm light, and ahead lay the uncertain but hopeful road to tomorrow. 6 months later, spring sunlight streamed through the windows of a small house on the outskirts of the county seat. Ruth sat at a sewing table, working on a wedding dress her own. Finally, the legal marriage would take place next week, after the last of the bureaucratic delays had been resolved. Judge Cartwright had expedited the paperwork, but even he couldn't rush every clerk in the county system. Tansy sat nearby, reading aloud from a primer Dr. Morrison had bought for her. Her voice was clear and confident as she worked through the more difficult words. "Freedom," she read, "is the right to make choices about your own life." "That's right," Ruth said, smiling. "You remember what that means?" "Means nobody can sell you or buy you or tell you who to love." Tansy closed the book and looked up. "Means you choose your own family." "Exactly right." A knock sounded at the front door. Nathaniel opened it to find a familiar figure, Lila Beaufort, looking worn but determined. "Miss Lila," he said, surprised. "What brings you here?" "Business," she replied. "I've come to speak with Ruth." Ruth set down her sewing and invited Lila into the small parlor. The two women sat across from each other, separated by months of conflict, but united by a need to move forward. "I've lost the estate," Lila said without preamble. "Creditors foreclosed last week." "I'm sorry," Ruth replied, and meant it. "I don't want your sympathy. I want your help." Ruth raised an eyebrow. "What kind of help?" "I'm starting over. Small seamstress shop in town. Need someone who knows fine work." Lila met Ruth's eyes. "Partnership, not employment. Equal shares." The offer hung in the air between them. Ruth considered carefully. "Why me?" she asked finally. "Because you're the best seamstress in 3 counties. Because you offered help when you had every reason to hate me. And because I need to learn how to treat people right." Ruth looked toward the window, where Nathaniel was teaching Tansy to plant a garden. Her new family, building their new life. "Equal partners," Ruth said finally. "Fair wages for both of us. No one works for free." Agreed. They shook hands, two women who had been enemies, now choosing to become allies. "There's one more thing," Lila said. "Pike's trial starts next month. Prosecution wants you to testify." "About what?" "The false debts, the forged papers. Everything he stole from the estate." Lila's voice grew stronger. "Help put him away for good." Ruth nodded. "Justice needs witnesses." "I'll testify." The trial of Wade Pike drew crowds from across the county. The courthouse overflowed with spectators as prosecutors laid out their case for fraud, embezzlement, and attempted kidnapping. Ruth testified clearly and calmly about Pike's threats and false debt calculations. Tansy, despite her young age, was allowed to describe the forged seals and altered ledger entries. "The child has an exceptional memory," Judge Cartwright explained to the jury. "Her testimony regarding document details has proven consistently accurate." Pike's defense attorney tried to argue that a slave's word couldn't be trusted in court, then remembered that Ruth was legally free, and her testimony carried full weight. The evidence was overwhelming. Pike's own ledger books proved the fraud. The forged county seals demonstrated intent to deceive. Character witnesses described his increasing violence and desperation. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. "Guilty on all counts," the foreman announced. Judge Cartwright sentenced Pike to 10 years in the state penitentiary. Your actions damaged not just individuals, but the entire foundation of legal trust in this community. As Pike was led away in chains, he turned for one last look at Ruth. This ain't natural, he said. Slaves don't get to be free just by wanting it. I didn't get free by wanting it, Ruth replied. I got free by earning it, proving it, and fighting for it. That's how freedom works. The courtroom erupted in applause. Justice, long delayed, had finally arrived. The wedding took place on a warm Saturday morning in late spring. Dr. Morrison's garden provided the perfect setting, surrounded by blooming roses and singing birds. Ruth wore the white dress she had sewn herself, simple but elegant. Nathaniel stood beside her in his best suit, nervous but glowing with happiness. Tansy served as flower girl and also as the unofficial historian of the event. Her perfect memory would preserve every detail for future telling. Judge Cartwright performed the ceremony, making the legal bonds as strong as the emotional ones. By the authority vested in me by the state, I pronounce you husband and wife. When Nathaniel kissed his bride, cheers rose from the assembled crowd. Dr. Morrison, the preacher, Mr. Hopkins, Joshua Hampton, Aunt Temperance, Isaiah, and dozens of other friends and supporters celebrated the triumph of love over law, justice over prejudice. Even Lila attended, standing quietly at the back with a small smile on her face. She had contributed flowers from her own garden and a prayer for their happiness. Speech, someone called out from the crowd. Nathaniel looked at Ruth, who nodded encouragingly. 6 months ago, he began, I made a promise in front of this community. Today I fulfilled that promise with the greatest joy of my life. He turned to Ruth. You've shown me what courage looks like, what grace looks like, what love looks like when it's backed up by action. Ruth stepped forward. And you've shown me that some promises are worth keeping, that some people keep their word no matter the cost. She looked out at the gathered crowd. But we couldn't have done this alone. Every person here helped us reach this day. You proved that justice isn't just a legal concept, it's a community choice. Tansy began to hum the familiar hymn, and once again voices joined in harmony. The song that had guided them through dark nights now celebrated their bright future. As the wedding reception continued in Dr. Morrison's garden, Ruth and Nathaniel stole a quiet moment alone on the front porch. The sounds of celebration drifted from the backyard, laughter, music, and the gentle murmur of friends sharing stories. Any regrets? Nathaniel asked softly. Ruth fingered the gold ring now properly placed on her left hand. Only one. What's that? I wish Mama could have seen this day. Wish she knew her little margin note led to all this. She knows, Nathaniel said with certainty. Somewhere, she knows. Tansy appeared on the porch, carrying a piece of wedding cake and grinning with frosting on her nose. Miss Ruth, Mrs. Reed, people are asking for the story again, about how we found the Freedom Papers. Ruth smiled. Then tell them, child. Tell them true. Tansy cleared her throat and began the tale in her clear, precise voice. She told about the brown ink in the Bible margins, the hymns that mapped safe roads, the forged seals with broken serifs, and the storm that had brought them all together. A small crowd gathered to listen, drawn by the power of truth told simply and well. And that's how Miss Ruth got her freedom, Tansy concluded. Not by luck or accident, but by remembering what was hers, proving what was right, and having friends brave enough to stand with her. Applause filled the evening air. Someone started the hymn again, and voices blended in harmony as the sun set behind the pine trees. What happens next? Dr. Morrison asked, joining them on the porch. We build a life, Ruth replied. Honest work, fair dealing, and teaching Tansy to read every book she can get her hands on. And the seamstress shop with Lila? Opens next month. Beaufort and Reed Fine Sewing. Ruth laughed. Who would have thought? As the celebration continued around them, the three of them, Ruth, Nathaniel, and Tansy, sat together on the porch swing, watching fireflies begin to dance in the gathering dusk. They had traveled from slavery to freedom, from despair to joy, from separation to family. The road had been dangerous and uncertain, but they had walked it together, guided by an 8-year-old's perfect memory and a hymn that sang of safe passage through the darkest nights. 1 year later, Autumn light slanted through the windows of Beaufort and Reed Fine Sewing. Ruth bent over a delicate christening gown, her needle flashing with practiced skill. Across the workroom, Lila cut fabric for a wedding dress. The partnership had prospered beyond anyone's expectations. Word of their fine work had spread throughout the county and beyond. Orders came from as far away as Charleston and Richmond. "Letter came today," Lila announced, holding up an envelope with an official seal. "What kind of letter?" Ruth asked, not looking up from her stitching. "From the state legislature. They want testimony about the Pike case. Seems our trial helped them pass new laws about document fraud and debt peonage." Ruth smiled. Justice making more justice. "I like that." The shop door chimed as Tansy entered, her arms full of books from her lessons with Dr. Morrison. At 9 years old, she could read Latin, do complex arithmetic, and had memorized most of Shakespeare's sonnets. "How was school today?" Ruth asked. "Wonderful. Dr. Morrison says I might be ready for university studies soon." "University?" Lila looked up, surprised. "Child's not even 10 years old." "Age doesn't matter if the mind is ready," Ruth replied. "Tansy's mind has always been special." Tansy set down her books and began organizing the shop's receipt ledger, a task she had taken over because her perfect memory caught every discrepancy. "Mrs. Reed," she said, "Mr. Patterson's order is ready for pickup. And the Henderson wedding dress needs final fitting tomorrow." "Thank you, dear." Ruth tied off her thread and examined the christening gown. The tiny stitches were invisible, the silk smooth as water. The door chimed again as Nathaniel entered, carrying lumber for new display shelves. His construction business had grown along with the seamstress shop. The Reed family was building prosperity through honest work and fair dealing. "Evening, ladies," he said, kissing Ruth's cheek. "How was business today?" "Busy," Lila replied. "Mrs. Caldwell ordered 6 ball gowns for her daughter's season in Charleston. That's wonderful." Nathaniel began measuring lumber against the shop wall. "Success suits you both." As evening deepened, they prepared to close the shop. Ruth and Lila tallied the day's receipts while Tansy swept the workroom floors. Nathaniel finished installing the new shelves. "Equal partners," Lila said as she counted the money. "Exactly as promised. Equal work, equal pay," Ruth agreed. "The way it should be." Outside, the town settled into comfortable evening routines. Lamps flickered on in windows, families gathered for supper, children played in the streets, their laughter carrying on the cool air. "Time to go home," Nathaniel announced. They walked together through the quiet streets, Ruth, Nathaniel, and Tansy, heading toward their small house, Lila walking toward her rented rooms above the bakery. Both women had lost the grand estates they once knew, but both had gained something more valuable, the ability to make their own way in the world. At the house, Ruth lit the lamps, while Nathaniel tended the fire. Tansy settled at the kitchen table with her schoolbooks, humming softly as she worked through mathematics problems that would challenge most adults. "Happy?" Nathaniel asked as he and Ruth sat together on their small porch. "Completely," Ruth replied, leaning against his shoulder. "Free, married, working, learning, helping others. What more could anyone want?" "Nothing more," he agreed. "Just this." Stars emerged in the darkening sky. A whippoorwill called from the pine woods. Inside, Tansy's clear voice drifted through the open window as she practiced reading aloud from her primer. "Freedom," she read, "is not a destination but a journey. It requires constant vigilance, continuous effort, and the courage to help others along the way." Ruth smiled at the words. True then, true now, true always. The evening breeze carried the sound of singing from somewhere in town, probably the church choir, practicing for Sunday service. The melody reminded Ruth of her mother's voice, of hidden writing in Bible margins, and of a little girl who could read the roads hidden in hymns. Some stories end with the winning. This one continued with the living day by day, choice by choice, stitch by stitch, building a life of dignity, purpose, and quiet joy. Under the vast canopy of stars, the Reed family settled into another peaceful evening, grateful for the journey that had brought them home to each other and to themselves. Asterisk, and in that soft lamplight, freedom wore the simple face of ordinary happiness, earned through extraordinary courage, and blessed by the mercy of those who choose justice over convenience, love over law, and truth over all. Asterisk. Asterisk, asterisk, the end, asterisk, asterisk.